So, welcome to the podcast, Rosie. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad this is finally happening. We connected, I feel like a few years ago now, through a mutual friend, wasn't it, on Instagram? Just
Yeah,
like you both really like each
yeah.
other.
Every time I see your posts, I think, oh, they're just so lovely and warm and authentic. And so
Oh,
I just feel a real
oh,
connection, I have to say.
oh, I love that. You always get like the greatest friends on the internet. I really do believe that. So, for anyone who hasn't met you or come across you yet, I'd really love you to kind of share your story because your story to me is not only empowering, but it's completely inspirational.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I guess I just have to start very briefly with the fact that I'm a magazine journalist, so I grew up in
Yeah.
magazines, and I
Yeah.
worked for a long time for Elle and then for Red, and I was the both those places. I was the beauty editor there, and I used to do a lot of the fashion shoots, and I used to do a lot of the cover shoots. So I had this really lovely, fashiony life, and very early on, at university, I met someone who then became my husband. So I met him at 18, and we just had this very steady, lovely relationship. And I think, I always sort of I think as a young girl, in my teenagedom, I kind of craved that. I really wanted the stability and the security. My parents split
Mm.
up when I was young, and I sort of had that kind of roses round the door dream. So I kind of went for the most kind of moral, straight guy that I could. And when I was at Red, as well as writing about beauty and fashion, I used to also write this column called Life's Rosie, and it was all about having young children and kind of the family dynamics and the dynamics between in a partnership. So there would be really funny stories about kind of, I don't know, like having dinner parties and my husband having eaten all the food like before I got home and things like that, or just funny things about how you argue over the heating and that sort of stuff. So I had this kind of really lovely sort of following of people who were really engaged in that, and also especially sort of having the young children and the funny things around that. Um, and so I led this very happy, content life. Obviously I had my struggles like everyone else, but generally in my relationship, very solid. And then about well, it was about sort of 3.5 years ago now, I suddenly sort of got this weird feeling that something was not quite right with my ex. And uh, I sort of saw this message on a phone, his phone. He'd never, ever, ever been the person. Some kind of guys, don't you? They're dangerous. You know what you're getting into. You know all that sort of stuff. He had never been that person,
Mm.
ever, ever, ever. He was so straight, so solid. I was always
Mm.
really adoring. Was just really lovely. And so this just gave me a really weird feeling. And I remember saying to him, you need to watch out because that's not a normal message. And yeah, then just for a couple of months it felt off, and yeah, then I discovered that there had been an affair. And I was absolutely devastated, and obviously it was just
Mm.
so awful, and it was such a shock. So I was dealing with the shock of that, but also the shock of who I thought he was. And then for him, I think,
Mm.
I don't really want to, I can't really put words into his mouth about why it happened, but it was I think because of what he was dealing with, and it was so against his character, he was really angry and really cross. And I really quickly went into this zone of trying to keep my family together and trying to say it'll be all right,
Mm.
trying to go to counseling. And he sort of wavered on the edge for felt like eternity, which was probably like 3 or 4 months. And then
Mm.
eventually decided that that's not what he wanted. And but in the periphery there was this other person. Was she back, was she not back? There's all that kind of. And so for me, that 4 or 5, probably 6 months in the end was so destabilizing, and so it just went to the core of who I was. It made me question everything about our relationship, but also just that
Mhm.
uncertainty around what did the future hold. Would he, I was so
Mm.
desperate to get it back, and I became that person that I never thought I would be. I was begging, I was crying, I would do anything, I would have accepted it on any terms.
Oh.
Whereas I've been this quite feisty individual before. And eventually he it just got so bad that I said, you have to leave. And and he went and he moved miles and miles and miles away, which was very tough for us all because it, it was such sort of
Oh.
abandonment. But at least from that point, from that lowest point, I felt like I was climbing up. And to go back to, your earlier question about writing about things, I went to see my editor at Red and I said to her, I just told her the whole story because actually at the same time I lost my job, like my main job at that point. So I went back to my editor.
Oh my god.
I know. So I'd lost my income and my life partner. And I just sort of told her the whole story and she was horrified. And then she said, well, would you like to write about it? And I thought, well, yes, I would actually, because I felt that it would be sort of cathartic. And also it felt like the
Mm,
best thing to do because I'd shared my life so much already.
mm,
And then when I wrote about it, I just got this incredible response from people.
mm, mm. I think that, firstly, I'm, like, getting choked up when you're talking about it because it's that, like, visceral feeling, isn't it? That you can really if you've been through something like that, you can really feel it, and, I just my heart goes out to you, like, obviously, even recalling that and, like, for me, how you talk about it so, like, objectively and eloquently, I'd really love to understand maybe someone's going through a breakup now or they're experiencing that pain, like, what's been the process to be able to get there? Because it's super empowering.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly couldn't talk about it in this way, 2 years ago, maybe a year ago I could. So, time is really important. There's no doubt about
Mm,
that.
mm,
But it put me on a journey where I really started to look at people's behavior and try and understand the patterns and understand my own patterns.
mm,
And I think, when you're in that pain, your brain chemistry takes over to a certain extent. We've all done that, like stalking the ex, just kind of like, where is he? What's he doing?
oh,
And almost like in a way to sort of avoid the sadness, you sort of become a sort of hunter
mm,
on a mission. So you try and find like it's going to make everything better if you find out they're seeing them, or like it's going to make everything better if you find out they're lying.
yeah,
But actually, you that's the way that you're kind of getting through those moments. You think, okay, well, if I can prove to him that he's being awful, if I can prove to him that he's lying to me, if I can prove all those things, but actually they're irrelevant. They're just your brain trying to sort of get some
mm,
kind of grip. And I think, I did some research on it all, and your brain kind of craves your X like it does an opioid. It's so strong, and they proved like the chemicals are so
wow,
strong. And actually, what's very interesting is even if it's a negative hit, it's a hit. So, if you see them on social media with their
wow,
mates, or you see them with their girlfriend, or you try and work out if it is their girlfriend, even though it's a negative thing, you're giving yourself another shot basically, or another hit at the gun.
mm,
And so the only way really to detach from them is to go cold turkey, or to certainly, I mean, if you have children you can't really do that, but is to kind of just be this sort of functionally friendly
years,
person.
decades, has now betrayed you, and yet you've got children. So I can't even imagine what that's like.
It's so To me it was so shocking, and in a way it was. But you know what was quite interesting?
Mm,
That there was obviously the pain of the betrayal. And what's interesting is that everybody has a reaction to that, right? Because it feels so awful. But actually, for me,
mm,
almost the bigger pain and the bigger overwhelm to deal with was like, well, what does my
oh,
life look like now? Like how do I care for these children? What house do we stay in? What's happened to that future? So in a way, it was the kind of the dissolving of the future and the dissolving of the past, because is this person the person I thought they were? Well, were they being honest when they were doing their vows? Were they happy when we went on holiday that day? Were they, all those things? So in a way, I think the mind just
yeah.
craves certainty so much. And it's like that
Mm,
moment before you rip off the plaster is worse than ripping off the plaster, isn't it? So in a
mm.
way, just waiting for that punch for him deciding, is he going to stay, is he going to go? Those were the worst moments. And at least when I was sort of faced with the reality, I could start climbing up.
I think that's so powerful. It's like that acceptance is like your base level, isn't it? So once you get to be able to accept where you are, then you can start like the rebuild. So I guess in that process, like where's your mindset at? Like, how are you getting through that daily?
Well, so when I was in the sort of hideous mire of it, I would get through it by talking to friends and getting their viewpoint, because I think
Yeah.
there are a lot of terms bandied around as soon as you start talking about separation, narcissism, gaslighting, and which I believe are
Yes.
are true and do happen, and certainly with my ex, he would sort of equate various things that he'd say, well, you behave so badly here. This is why I'm doing this, or,
Oh
and
my goodness.
yeah, which was just, I don't think he's not a bad person, but I think he was just doing everything he could to justify his actions to himself,
Mm,
effectively. And
mm,
so I think that
mm,
just messes with your brain so much. So I thought I was a really bad person. I thought I'd been a really bad wife. And, I just, and so for me it was talking to people, and I know so many people, when they're going through a breakup, find it really hard to talk about it, because it's such a hit on the ego. You almost don't want to talk about it, because
mm,
you talk about it, you make it
mm,
real. If you talk about it, you have to show that you're being rejected. But actually I felt that was so important to do that, and so I talked to a handful of people, and in the rest of the time I sort of really shrunk my world. I just kind of did
mm,
what I needed to, and I got through each day. And then things like gratitude, like I did sit there and think, okay, I have got my children, I've got my health, I've
mm,
got my pet.
mm,
I'm very lucky
mm,
in so many ways. So actually, that did help reset my mind a bit.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. I think as well that the practice of gratitude is like banded around so much now, but if you really dedicate to that, you create a different neural pathway. So it's part of like neuroplasticity. You get into your prefrontal cortex, you're able to have a, like repetition and recognition. And it's so powerful that you did that.
Yeah.
I've actually seen I mean, I've read so much of your stuff, Rosie, but like I've seen even how you show up on lives and the way you converse about it. And the way you're talking about it now is super interesting to me because I think when we were first introduced, it was coming up to 3 years ago. We kind of connected. And even in that time, your conversation's very different.
Yes, I was just thinking that when I was talking to you. I think it is, and I think
Yeah.
even I actually was weirdly listening to something, so the other day, that I said, because I thought, oh, I better listen to that, see if I've said anything terrible. And yeah.
That's
and
me every week.
and actually it was a friend of mine that I was talking to, and she said something about his bad behavior, and I said, even just you saying that kind of really helps, because I was still in the zone of not quite believing it, and I have to be honest, there are some stuff that I still haven't, I'm still not really angry. I've never had the anger stage. I've never had, and there are some things that I'm still working on. Like, I think we're all working on stuff, aren't
Mm,
we? We're all kind of getting over stuff and moving through it, and just trying to be honest with ourselves. That's the biggest thing.
mm. Oh my God, absolutely. It's really interesting that you say you've not had the anger stage because I feel like I'm in an angry stage of my life where like people just piss me off.
Oh, I wish I could have that. I feel like, in a way, I don't know whether, like, I just can't even find that, and actually, he did break his vows, and he did leave, and he did do all of those things, and you think that I would be angry, but I'm not angry. I'm sad, I'm actually
Mm,
happier
mm,
now.
mm.
I'm glad, grateful that it happened, in a way. But I don't feel angry, which is really interesting.
It's so, so interesting. Yeah, especially I guess actually I'd love to know kind of how it played out for you in the pandemic as well, because obviously you've gone through like this huge shift in your life and then we're put into this other thing where I don't know, we think the grass is greener, right? I was like isolated with just my partner and sometimes did not want to be.
Yeah,
You know, and then other people, who, were dealing I suppose obviously you had your children with you, but
yeah.
other people were then feeling like, "I just want that connection." So, like, I guess what was happening then?
Well, what's interesting is I almost felt like I went through such pain and such a shift, and I accepted I'd had been forced to accept such major change, that actually I didn't find the pandemic as hard as I think a lot of people did, because actually I was kind of quite I kind of learned to accept change, I think, in a way that I didn't want to have done, but I did. So by the time the
Mhm.
pandemic came, I was like, okay. And you know what? I thought again with the gratitude, I'm really lucky. I'm in the countryside. We've got enough space.
Yeah,
Um, the kids are being homeschooled really well. I felt really lucky. And also, I think being in the countryside as opposed to the city, you could go for walks
yeah,
and things with people, and you could, sit on, in a park and talk to them in a way that I don't think you could in London. So I feel like I was sort of lucky, and in a way, in terms of my book came out right in the middle of all of that, and so it meant, we were chatting about how actually you have those home days where you achieve quite a lot. I think I
yeah.
achieved quite a lot. One thing I did do though, when I was in the middle of the lockdown, I thought it'd be really sensible to stop taking the sertraline that I take. So sertraline, if anyone's listening, who doesn't know, of listening, is an antidepressant, quite a sort of low key one. And the doctor had given me that just in the breakup because I wasn't sleeping. And I thought,
Yeah.
oh, this is a really good
Oh.
opportunity to to dial down on this, because I'm not going to have to, I don't have to go out to any social functions or do anything about
Yeah,
real
yeah.
lesson to me, because I I did the thing that you're supposed to do, which was like, halve it and then halve it again and all that kind of stuff. And I was absolutely fine. Then one day, bam, I just went down. I was just and I rang a friend. She said, "Oh my God, you sound like
Mhm.
you did 2 years ago." And so that was
Oh.
one negative of the pandemic.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think the point about lack of sleep, I swear that is one of the worst side effects for you to try to be able to function if you're not sleeping well
Yeah.
through anything that's traumatic. I mean, what I've listened to a few of your lives, so I kind of know a bit, but for anyone who hasn't listened, what was it like then?
What, when I wasn't sleeping?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, it was horrendous. So I just went through these stages of, like, when my husband just wouldn't come, he didn't come home. And so I would, and he had a job that kind of meant that was sort of plausible, but not really plausible. And so I would just be awake. I literally felt like I wanted to claw my skin off, because you just think you don't know
Oh.
where they are, who they're with. And I just remember, it would just be so awful. And then you'd fall asleep and then you'd wake up sweating, and then you'd have the heart palpitations.
Mhm.
And I remember I went round, there's some really nice, a couple, he's a doctor and she's a nurse. And I just went round to their house at about 11 o'clock at night one night. And I just said, please, can you give me some sleep pills? Because I will never sleep. And I've got to get the kids up in the morning and I've got to function as a
Oh.
mother. And they did, they probably gave me enough for like 4 or 5 days. And that's when I went to the doctor, as they were going to run out, and just said, okay, I need to do something. And they did kick in and stabilize my sleep and stabilize my weight loss. But
Yeah.
now I've got to
Oh.
go through the I feel like much better place. But I know my cousin's psychiatrist, so she was saying to me that you drop lower. Because I thought you stop taking them, you just go to base point, but actually you don't. Your brain stopped making serotonin, I think, hasn't it? So therefore, your brain's got to
Yeah.
relearn to
Oh,
make that
yeah.
serotonin, so you do dip lower. So that's something that I think, okay, I've got that to come.
Oh, bless you. But I feel like you're in a much stronger place, and you can kind of like process that, like you understand why that's happening. So as long as you know the
Yes.
why behind it, like you can kind of handle it.
I hope so. I hope it's going to be a bit like PMT, where you think, "Oh my God, the world's going to end," and then you think, "Oh, hang on, hang on, I'm due on tomorrow."
Oh my goodness. Yeah, exactly. I'm like a dragon at the minute. Like, talk about my anger in PMT. My partner's like, "I just walked in the door, like, what's wrong?" Like, "Get out!" Anyway, you touched on it briefly, but I'd really love to talk about your book because I think it's so like, again, like, so brave to write about this great pain that you've been through and to keep bringing it forward and to keep, like, writing about it and sharing it to help other people, so I'd really love to get into that.
Oh, thank you. Every day I get messages from women who have read it and
Oh.
who are in it, and I have to say that is unbelievably rewarding, and I'm so grateful to them for
Oh.
saying that. And I think, there is so much. When you break up with, so certainly when someone leaves you, there is a massive
Mm.
temptation to say, which is totally understandable, oh, it was a joint decision, or I didn't care about them, or I was thinking that too, because you know ultimately, from the research that I'd done, you form this primary attachment, and your whole ego is so interlaced with that person, and your whole vision of yourself and how desirable you are and what you bring to the world. So if that
Mm.
one person says, yeah, no thanks very much, I'm just going to go over here, it is horrendous. And so I think there's a natural temptation to not talk about it, and then I think certainly, there's a
Mm.
natural temptation certainly not to sort of shout about it in the public eye. I mean, not that I think I'm like, J Lo or anything, but I know that, you know, just to talk about it publicly is always hard, because you don't want to be forever branded as someone who's a kind of reject, or that girl who got
Oh.
dumped basically. So, but as I say, I just felt a really strong urge to share it. And there's also quite a lot of people that will say, well, that's not fair on your children. That's not fair on so, but I
Oh, really?
yeah, and I think it's, like, as in, what's that going to say to them about their dad, and I hope that with him, I didn't sort of mention the gritty details in the book,
Mm,
um,
mm,
about
mm.
how I felt about the things that he did, and I wasn't sort of graphic about those things, um, but I do think the children thing is a way of society almost quite a lot shutting women's voices down, because I think as
Oh,
well, when we
absolutely.
talk about early parenthood, which is very hard, and of course it's very you know it's a gift, it's amazing, but it is really hard, and people feel really lonely, some people feel depressed, some people feel really shocked, and then the load between how it's shared between the man and the woman, there is incredibly tough, some of it, but people can't talk about
Mm.
it, because then they think, well, children will read it and feel like they've been rejected. So I remember my editor at Elle ages and ages ago wrote a piece about how tough she'd found early motherhood, and people were up in arms.
It's just also like everyone's experience of something is totally different. I just
Yeah.
don't understand that. And especially I don't understand women coming after women as
Oh
well. It's like
yeah.
I can't.
I know there are some
I
really
just cannot.
I did this piece for the Mail, and the guy came round, took my picture, and I tidied up the kitchen before he came. And then the comments, I've stopped reading them now. The comments are so vile, because
Oh
someone,
no.
no wonder he left her. Look how sterile her kitchen looks. And I was like, oh God, I just tidied it up.
Oh my
There's a big pile of
god.
junk over in the corner. But yeah, so people, I think, can be really judgy. But as you and I both know, a lot of that comes from their fears, doesn't it? It's like, actually, people, I think, sometimes
Yeah.
feel like it's catching. You know, like, okay, you slipped
Yeah.
up, so that could catch, that could happen to me. And we all do it as humans. People want to know why. Why do you think he left? And I remember one woman saying,
Mm.
didn't give him enough blowjobs, because then it's like, okay, well, this has happened. I know this has happened to her. Let's try and work out how it can not happen to me, which is understandable, but quite harsh.
Yeah. That's insane.
Yeah.
Imagine waking up and saying that to a stranger on the internet.
Yes, exactly. Oh, yes,
Sorry.
listen, that to
Like,
me in real life.
oh no! Oh
Yeah,
my, I don't know what's worse. I've gotta be
yeah.
honest, actually, I don't know what's worse. Oh my god, bless you.
Mhm.
So I think as well, like, talking about the book, what can people kind of expect? Because obviously I'm gonna share all the details, like, in the show notes, but say if anyone's, like, in that place now, what kind of things can they feel and experience from the book?
Well, so I called it part memoir, part manual. So I wrote about my
Oh.
own experience, and I sort of followed it, on a sort of timeline. So the kind of horrible shock, the devastation, and then the sort of detachment that we talked about, and then the slow journey out of it,
Mm.
finishing with kind of dating and sex and all those fun things at the end. So it's about the journey, but it's also full of like really practical tips and sort of expert advice. And also, so the practical tips are, like, try and position it this way, try and think of it this way, you know
Mm.
physiologically, what can you do, exercise, what can you eat, which way can you reframe it, all those things. and then also an understanding, like we were talking about before, about the brain chemistry of it. So actually how your brain can kind of sabotage your recovery if you're not careful. Because a lot of
Mm,
people, we all say, oh, I don't want to be that woman who's bitter about it in 20 years time, but actually there's a
mm,
reason for that, because people they get stuck in that safety zone of feeling angry or bitter, because actually if
mm,
you're in that
mm,
zone, you feel looked after, and you feel, you don't have to go out and, try dating, or you don't have to, it becomes comfortable. So I think there are just so many,
mm.
like, lots of tactics and lots of strategies and, lots of tips as well.
I love that. I love that. So it's kind of really user friendly, like people will be able to take away lots from it, like super specific.
Yeah, and I think it works for people who are, it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to be the person that has left. You could be the person that's
Mhm.
leaving. There are quite a lot of women that have said, I feel really miserable and trapped in a marriage. Just, am I still allowed in? And I'm like, yes, 100%. And then
Oh.
I know, and I think, do you know what? In a way, I think that's so hard, because I think women quite often leave properly. Like, quite often with men, they'll have an affair, I think, to get themselves out. Whereas women, I
Yeah.
think, I mean, that's a real generalization. I'm really sorry to any men that listen. I'm sure there are loads of really decent guys doing it the proper way. But quite often a woman
Yeah.
will think, I'm really miserable. And then they have to say to their husband, I don't love you anymore. And he says, why? And you have to
Mm,
justify it, and you have to do all those things. And I think that is, it can really take its toll. It's a really hard thing to do.
mm. And I think as well on the flip side, you've got the guilt piece. You've got a
Mm.
completely different piece that you're trying to work through, and like
Yeah.
living with that is like totally different.
Yeah. 100%. I agree.
So, for anyone who hasn't followed you or hasn't connected yet, obviously I'm going to share all of your details in the show notes, but what's coming up for you? What can we look out for?
Oh, well, thank you. I'm gonna do a podcast myself, so you'll probably end up on my
Ah,
podcast. So I'm gonna do
great.
that. I'm gonna do a sort of heartbreak to happy one, talking to people who, in the public eye and in the media, who've been through their different splits. So I'm working on that at the moment, and I've got a regular relationship column in the Mail, which is fun,
Yeah,
on the Mail
yeah.
on Sunday. And yeah, and I'm just doing quite a lot of beauty and things like that. I'd quite like to do like lots of, I might do some retreats, some more retreats. I think now the
Oh,
world's opened up a bit. And I
yeah.
think, as women, I, there are so many sort of women in different positions. They might be single, or they might just want to, they might want to go on holiday with their girlfriends. Or I just would quite like to do retreats where people go and they come back and they've eaten good food and they've done yoga and they've learned how to put their makeup on, and they've done, just like amazing feel good retreats,
Yeah.
basically.
Oh my goodness, sign me up. I will
Yes.
be there. I miss that. Like, I just wanna hang around with, like, women. There's
Yes.
just so
Yeah,
much in that, isn't there? As much as it's,
there
like,
is.
great with your partner, like, the female energy is amazing, isn't it?
It is. Round a pool with a margarita,
Yeah, exactly,
having
with
just done some
alcohol.
yoga or something, so you feel really good about yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I'll
Yeah.
meditate in the morning, then I'll have a margarita.
Yes.
Perfect.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh my goodness, Rosie, thank you so much. There's so much information in here, and I really do advise anyone listening to go and check Rosie out, because you have tons of videos as well where you've gone and really spoken about the pain, and you've been so open about that. And I've been through heartbreak, and I've listened to you, and you're really, really inspirational to me. So I'm so glad you came on the podcast.
Oh, well, I'm very grateful to you, and right back at you. I feel your energy sort of
Oh,
vibing off your Instagram page. It's so
oh,
good.
oh my
Keep
goodness.
doing what
Thank
you're
you so
doing.
much. Oh, I will. Thank you so much, Rosie. Take care.
Bye.